Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good eternal night or eternal day if anybody is tuning into us from bases at the North Pole or down in the Antarctic. We have again one of our regular favorite guests, the noted and deliberately outrageous veteran financial analyst and former Hill Samuel merchant banker, Martin Hutchinson, to guide us again through the many myths, lies, and simply confusing labyrinths of the global economic scene and the financial tangles we are all caught up in. And today, Martin is turning his frighteningly brilliant uh, Cambridge hone, both Cambridges on both sides of the Atlantic mind, on the issue of AI, artificial intelligence, and what he terms as the Cold War being waged right now for global domination in AI. There are those who worship AI mindlessly. There are those who hate AI mindlessly, the modern Luddites of our time. Martin, of course, belongs to neither category, and therefore we need him more than ever to shine light on this confusion and darkness. Take it away, Martin.
Yeah, sure. Well, the interesting thing about AI is that it's the first really energy intensive new technology we've had in 60 years. The steam engines used vastly more energy than their predecessors, and so did electric power, used more energy, and then the automobile used all that petrol. And then about 1960, technology went off into its own little world of computers and such, and really stopped using all that much energy, which is why the US hasn't built a new power station since the middle 1980s, or it had a couple that came on board just last year, but there's sort of something like a 35-year gap in nuclear power stations between the last one and the current ones. And it's because we didn't need it. The difficulty is, of course, that now we've got this new technology that uses a lot of energy. We're a lot less good at installing the technology, storing the energy it's going to need than we used to be, because we've now got environmentalists and regulators and, all the complicated paraphernalia of modern life that stops us doing anything under 20 years. Meanwhile, across the Pacific Ocean, China doesn't have any of that. They can build a new nuclear power station in 4 years, start to finish. And so, therefore, their ability to use AI, whatever its uses is far greater than ours. And we really do have a Cold War problem. You can imagine it in the piece I wrote. I said, supposing that everybody had taken William S. Jevons, the mid-19th century British economist, seriously, when he said there was a serious problem because Britain was about to run out of coal. And if they'd taken that seriously, they would then have shut down the steel industry, because the Siemens Martin and Bessemer steelmaking processes used huge amounts of coal. And the result is the industrial revolution would have slowed to a halt. And doubtless the war would still have happened in 1914, but we'd all have been a lot poorer and probably have run out of food halfway through it. And so you can see what regulation does to new technology if it's excessively powerful, which currently I think it is. Now, the other question, of course, is, do we actually want AI? And there I think it's difficult to tell because AI is currently in the stage of the early aircraft, sort of 1908 or so, where the Wright brothers flew 800 feet at a height of 20 feet. And, that was the great moment when humanity took off. But aircraft couldn't actually do very much for a long time after that. But you then had an incredibly rapid technological acceleration between about 1909 and 14, when every country in the world got into the aircraft building business. I've described it as being the combination of Silicon Valley and Russian roulette, because all the entrepreneurs were in their 20s and having incredible new ideas. But unlike with stupid computers, to test a new aircraft, you actually have to fly in the thing. And so we lost a terrible percentage of our brightest minds when their airplanes crashed. And eventually the airplanes got better and crashed less. But around about 1912 was peak carnage, because the very early airplanes hardly flew at all, and therefore you could step out of them with no more than a broken leg or so if they crashed to the ground from 20 feet at 30 miles an hour. But once they got good, they then had a period when they could fly at 60 miles an hour, but their stall speed was 50. And therefore it was incredibly difficult to keep the damn things in the air.
There's a film called Those
Eventually
Incredible
they
Men
got
and Their
better
Flying
engines.
Machines or something.
Yes,
Anyway.
that's right.
Yeah, sorry, Marta, I didn't want to throw you off your train of thought.
Well, no, really, I'm just saying that we don't have a good idea of what AI is going to be able to do for us. But having our geopolitical adversaries, should we say, or competitors, whatever you want to call them, lack the barriers that we've got towards developing AI is very, very dangerous. And therefore, we've got to get rid of the barriers. I mean, the data centers use huge amount of electricity. And as I understand it, we need more data centers than perhaps we would have done, because the data center technology, Moore's law, which is hardware, stopped about 2018. And so therefore, if you want to multiply the amount of software you keep on your data centers by 10, you have to build 10 times as many data centers. Whereas in software, that's not the case. We've still got various Moore's laws going on in software. And so AI is getting better all the time at an incredibly rapid rate, like the early airplanes. But it does mean we've got this bottleneck of data centers that, we've simply got to have, and that are going to require a lot of energy to power them.
Presumably they're putting them. I know they're putting a lot in Scandinavia where it's cold weather, or perhaps Canada, because obviously they need cooling, cheap cooling, right? So
they need water,
and water.
So you can't put them in Arizona like solar cells.
Yeah, right.
I mean, solar power works best in the Arizonas, which is why it's fatuous that Britain's spent any money on it. I mean, God, the climate there. And these things, you're quite right, work better where it's cold and wet. And so Britain and Scandinavia are probably very good places to put them. And of course, you've got low population density in Scandinavia still, and the bits up north really have very low population density. So there's fewer people incommoded by data centers everywhere. The fact that the biggest data center nexus in the US is Loudoun County in Virginia, which Marty probably knows as well as I do. I mean, it's an incredibly crowded, very rapidly growing suburban area. And it's not surprising that all the NIMBYs hate data centers, because they're taking up good building land.
Do the data centers need to be, is there like an electricity transmission issue? Like you need power stations near population centers because of, can data centers be far away from the areas that they're serving?
Up to a few hundred miles, yes. There's a latency problem caused by the speed of light, which is not infinite. But a data center in, say, that rural bit of North Carolina that had all the floods, where the government didn't spend any money on it at all under Biden, would actually be only 400 miles from Washington, D.C. And so therefore, that's a perfectly good distance. What you can't do is put the data centers in Australia, because that's 12,000 miles and it takes a tenth of a second for the signal to get there and back. But a few hundred's not a problem.
All I can say about this subject is that I get bombarded, because I'm in the European Union, by advertisements from the European Commission saying we're not going to have American AI, we're going to create our European AI. And I don't pay too much attention to it, except to know that it's all thoroughly negative. It's not what we can do, it's about what we can regulate and how we can stop it.
Yes, exactly.
It's like a total nanny state, as if saying no is a virtue in itself, and that American ideas. And I said, I've told Marty several times when I've had a lot of American guests on my show and on our joint show, and the American can-do spirit is so different from the European spirit of cautious negativity towards anyone with new ideas, and the idea that regulation beats innovation. I mean, you can't have, for a start, you need innovation before you can have regulation. Regulation doesn't serve its own purpose. But Europeans don't seem to understand that,
For the EU, it appears to serve its own purpose. Yes, I didn't even look at Europe, but I'm sure that they're worse off than the US because they think of an extra 5,000 reasons to stop
exactly
AI and data centers and so on.
But is the UK any better? That's why
now.
Not now.
Not now. It was in 1790, but it's not now. No, that's one of the reasons I left was Britain no longer has the sort of entrepreneurial spirit it had in 1790. It was already losing it in the late 19th century. This is not the fault of Keir Starmer or any of his relatives. It's something that goes back 150 years. You could see it falling away. But no, Britain was like America in 1790. And America actually was rather alarming because it had very low business ethics.
Right.
American business really was very rough early on. They calmed it down a bit after 1870 because they had all those big companies that were created by American protectionism. And if you've got General Motors and Exxon running the economy, they're going to make sure the little guys can't rip them off, and therefore, ethical standards will improve. But before the Civil War, ethical standards in the US were unspeakable. And that was actually a business advantage for Britain.
Yeah. It kind of relates to the news, doesn't it? Because nobody's talking about in the British media, they're all beside themselves with excitement about this new messiah without giving us any reason. Of course, it's all stitched up in front of us. The media and the Labour Party and everyone is saying, well, hang on, is this unconstitutional? You just got a new prime minister who's vote anyway. The problem with Britain is partly systemic. The reason why there's been 6 prime ministers in 10 years is Britain's British economic model is not working. But AI was supposed to be the big rescue all for the British economy, and I don't see that anyone even mentioning AI. I've never seen an article on AI. No one's ever discussed AI for Britain. So where's that going? I don't know.
It's very sad. They've got the researchers, but their energy policies are so catastrophic that you couldn't install AI in any volume in the UK because you can't run the data centers. They're absolutely stretched to the limit on their energy policies because they haven't built any power stations for the last 40 years. Same problem as here. And then they're shutting down power stations for green reasons. And of course, all that solar and wind is no more use for AI than it is for anything else. You can't have an artificial intelligence system that shuts down when it's a calm day or when it's cloudy. So, I think France has a better shot at AI, but of course it's subject to EU regulations. And at the moment, Macron is not exactly encouraging, but they do have the nuclear program, so that's their one advantage.
So the Brits are not from what I've heard is that Starmer's economic guru is practically a Marxist. It's a massive expansion of the welfare state. It reads like a policy document from the Labour of the 1970s. It's quite incredible. So
Starmer's or the new guys?
The new guys.
Burnham's. It's Burnham's. Yeah, Burnham's economic guru is way left of anything we've had in Britain before.
Yeah.
I mean, an hour in Bevin would have thought he was a commie.
Yeah, right. So, and
no,
just
I
to get,
think.
yeah,
I mean, I think that Britain needs a revolution from top to bottom, and it's not going to get it. Obviously, this is just changing deck chairs on the Titanic. It's another Labour government. Why get excited about it?
right. Yeah.
I mean, I think the interesting thing was the Blair Labour government, which the damage it did wasn't obvious at the time, and so therefore it got 3 terms of office. And I think we now realise that Blair was a lot more damaging than we realised at the
Yes.
time. With all, for one thing, the sort of signing up for the European Court of Human Rights and bringing in all the extra regulations and so on. He basically made it impossible for Cameron and his successors to run a real Tory government. Not that Cameron really wanted to run a real Tory government, but Liz Truss did, and she was stopped. I think it needs sort of root and branch turning upside down, and I don't unfortunately think Farage is the man to do that, but we'll see.
Martin, just following up on that point because it's so central, do you see any papabili? Do you see any potential popes who might bring in a reformation of the church, so to speak, who might reinvigorate British government and the British economy?
Well, my man's Rupert Lowe, but I don't know whether he'll get anywhere. I mean, the moment I went off Farage, I've never been terribly fond of him stylistically, but the moment I went off Farage was when he fired Rupert Lowe, because Rupert Lowe was the ideas man within that reform coalition. And getting rid of the ideas man, it's like Edward Heath firing Enoch Powell in 1968, or any of the other points at which right of centre governments have got rid of the thinkers in their midst. I mean, they never made full use of Keith Joseph either, to use a more benign example.
But
And Norman Tebbit, of course, although there it was the IRA that did him, not Thatcher.
But Martin, you absolutely don't like Rupert Lowe, do you? I mean, he's the send them home guy. Where
Yes. And
Why
I'm
wouldn't I like Rupert Lowe? He's the closest the British have to an intelligent Trump.
Yeah.
Not that Trump's stupid, but he's got good instincts and to some extent works by his instincts. And it's worked pretty well, but Lowe's obviously a more conventional politician, shall we say, in the sense that he's a politician, not a billionaire real estate dealer.
But Martin H., what are his policies apart from deportation of immigrants?
Well, as I understand it, he's a proper free marketer, and I don't think any of the others are.
Right.
I mean, that's why I like him. Well, I like him. I like him on immigrants, and I think that a more "quote unquote" extreme immigrant policy is what you have to do to discourage them. It's not that you want to be unkind, of course you don't, but I think in order to discourage future visitors, particularly in Britain, where they've had such a grotesque surplus over the last 50 years, you're going to have to repatriate a few, as Rupert Lowe says, as Trump's done, and as Powell said in 1968.
Well, I'm sympathetic to that argument. I mean, just arriving in the UK yesterday, it's just changing very much. Even Winchester, which is a traditionally all-white town, it's not the same place. And I don't know. It seems to be a sort of what's a shell game or something, because combined with the current welfare state, unless you drastically cut the welfare state, the immigrants are kind of supposed to be paying for it, so paying for the old generation, but they're squeezing out the younger generation of native Brits who can't afford property, can't afford to get on the property ladder. And what you have is sort of aging boomers being serviced by people from Pakistan who've just arrived, and their Deliveroos and their home care programs and things like that. And it doesn't seem to me that, and then you have people living at home with their parents until they're 50 or 40 or something, you know? And it doesn't seem to be a very sustainable British economic model. And there's a kind of malaise about Britain because there's so much political
Yes.
correctness, and there's
Yes,
nobody
no, that's
grasping.
the other difficulty. You can't talk about it there.
That's right.
I mean, my British friends say, "When are you coming back?" And I said, "I'm not." Well, the current speech codes are in effect because I'd probably be arrested at Heathrow. Thank you very much.
Well, there was somebody. There's a guy I know who's a reform member, and maybe I'll put it up at the beginning of this program. But there's a one of those very well designed British transport police posters where there's a bobby, a sort of silhouette of a bobby, and then there's a person behind a a wall or something, and he says, "Has someone done something wrong near you? Report them." Seriously, I mean, it's like
No,
pre-crime.
absolutely. And
Oh,
that's
completely.
straight Orwell. I
It
mean,
is really
and
Orwellian.
indeed, it's straight Soviet Union. I'm
Yes.
just reading and watching The Master and Margarita, which is Bulgakov's look at 1930s Moscow, and which had to be smuggled out to the West to be published, and is a very good novel. It's much funnier than Dostoevsky. And Bulgakov's view of what life was like in Soviet Russia in the 1930s. You know, everybody's going around reporting everybody else to the police, and people are disappearing suddenly, and so on. Yeah, it's becoming like that in Britain, isn't it? From what I read, I haven't been back since the latest nonsense, but
It's probably not as bad as some people fear, but it's worth flagging it up lest it become worse. But it's definitely, I've got British podcast friends who are very cautious about what they say, you know. And I feel a bit more cautious than when I'm in Sweden because in Sweden, I think Sweden is a bit freer than the UK. So anyway,
Sweden's better run than the UK. I
Yes.
mean, it has been since 1990. It was a socialist hellhole in the 70s and 80s when I used to do business there. But since 1990, it's really been quite well run. And they saw the immigrant problem and appear to have not solved, but alleviated it. And as
yeah.
I understand it, Sweden's still very Swedish, having not been back since the mid 90s. So maybe it's all different.
Well, I'd correct you on that point. But I think that it's a small, it's also becoming changed very radically. But I'd say that it's a relatively, it's got a lot of resources for its size of population, you know, a
Yes.
lot of mineral resources and very low population density. You feel that when you come down into Europe, continental Europe, there's so much density of housing and decaying infrastructure. Just traveling on the train through Brussels, real shithole if you ask me, and Amsterdam. So many people, so much, I don't know,
Yes.
poverty. And Sweden is like a paradise by comparison, you know?
Well, Eastern Europe's better too.
Yeah. Anyway,
The Bulgarias and Romanias of this world, or even Slovenia, still have fairly low population density, and Slovenia now has a new government that's going to make sure that immigrants stay out.
I mean, East Europeans are
Because
losing population. Bulgaria has lost a third of its population since 1990. It's quite
Bulgaria has
incredible.
lost a third of its population.
If you want to buy
which makes it
property, you
nice
go to
and
Bulgaria.
uncrowded.
Yeah. Anyway, well, AI, can we continue on this theme of AI then? Because I think a lot of people kind of looking to AI as, well, that's going to solve our problems somehow. But without it, it's like a faith issue, isn't it? Some people are worried about it, but some people think, well, that's going to solve everything without really thinking about it. I mean, it's like what do you think, Martin, or either?
I'm on balance very positive. I think it'll increase our capability to do things. I think it will, on the whole, create jobs rather than destroy them, and there'll be better jobs in the same way that computers created jobs that didn't destroy them. If you look at 1950s offices, you've got these vast football-sized stadiums with people sort of working adding machines or whatever, and all that's gone. But nevertheless, you know, big companies still have lots of employees. And I think AI is going to have the same effect. And of course, because it's able to do a lot of things that ordinary people can do, it will increase their output per capita, and we'll all become richer through it. There'll be teething troubles, of course, but it's a little bit like the railways or electrification or any of the other great advances. The teething troubles can be difficult. The railways, they were extremely difficult. If you think about it, half-built railways have no value at all. So you've got to put all the capital investment in before you get anything out. And in 1830s Britain or 1840s Europe, that was extremely difficult because they were all very poor societies. And you're talking about half British gross domestic product going into building railways over the 15 years to 1850. I mean, that's over the 15 years, but it's still a huge amount of money. And that reduced living standards, of course, because they were having to do capital investment instead of pay wages. Eventually, it all came right after the British in the 1840s. But it's interesting, it had a political effect. I think the revolutions of 1848 were all caused by the impoverishment of Western Europe by building railways in the 1840s. There was a huge amount of investment and no new money coming in because they haven't built them yet.
Wow. Not that the fact that people could travel and communicate with each other more easily. I mean, I'm sure, I wonder if with the future historians, the rise of populism in Europe is thanks to Elon Musk's purchase of X. I mean, that's like a true breathing hole that has made free speech much better in Europe than it was 3 or 4 years ago. I'll tell you that. I mean, the Biden era, the late Cameron, I mean, 2018, 2022, when we believed all the Russiagate lies, COVID lies, and all the rest of it. That's changed completely. So 1848 was the railways a sort of accelerant of revolution?
Well, they were the capital expenditure on them made everybody miserable for a few years, and so that caused the revolutions. And then, of course, you're quite right. Once they'd built them, even the first lines, they had a huge addition of wealth to the society. So the 1850s, which admittedly had a couple of gold discoveries as well in California and Australia, were a fabulous decade. Everybody had all sorts of new ideas, and suddenly the working classes were rich like they'd never been rich before. But they had to pay for it beforehand. And even in England, they had Chartism. And on the continent, you had all those revolutions. To what extent those revolutions were widely supported is an interesting question. My favorite anecdote is the 1848 revolution in France, which was all taken over by left-wing intellectuals, and they formed the Constituent Assembly. And then they had elections on a universal franchise, which they thought would cement them in power. And they got slaughtered in the elections. They got 10% of the vote. And the real reactionaries got about 25, and then sort of middle of the road, let's keep it as it is, got 50 odd. And that was Cavaignac and then Napoleon III, both of whom were in the middle. But the funniness of the intellectuals and the left setting up elections and then watching themselves get slaughtered is really a very good laugh.
Wow. And are there any parallels today to what can we develop the thoughts about?
Well, I think the cost of all the data centers is going to impose more of a cost than we get return from AI in the initial years, because you're going to have to build power stations as well as data centers, and you add that together, and that's a lot of money. And also, inevitably, they'll build the wrong data centers and in the wrong places, because in the US, they gave them an idiotic tax break of being able to expense all capital expenditures in last year's tax bill. I mean, it's a straight handout to the big corporations. And that means that capital expenditures, there's all sorts of companies building data centers who've got no real need for them. And the trouble is that's going to strain the system even further, because nobody much is building power stations yet, although they're beginning to realize the need to do so.
And is there a supply issue with rare earths and China having a holding that, controlling that?
Yes, but that's fairly soluble, unless the environmentalists mess everything up, because there's actually quite a few rare earth supplies dotted around the US, big continent, the US. So it's got some rare earth deposits in some of the Western states, and it's got companies trying to exploit them. I think, provided the market's price signals remain useful, the West will remove China's monopoly within about 5 years.
Hmm.
Could you go into more detail on that, Martin? Because that is an absolute mind blower itself. It flies in the face of all the institutionalized pessimism we hear over here in America, that China is so far ahead in AI and rare earths and related technologies that they are increasing their lead. So why do you say that? Because obviously you don't say it lightly. Explain the details to us.
Well, on rare earths, it's really that China had very good deposits and no environmentalists. And therefore, they went on producing rare earths while we shut down our producers. Because by the time you added the environmental costs, and rare earth prices were at that stage fairly low, there was no point in producing them here. What's now MP Materials, and was in those days a company called Molycorp, was shut down its California rare earth deposits in 2010. And at that point, China gained its monopoly. And then nobody did, because this country was badly run in 2010, nobody did anything to reverse that. And Trump's giving out a few incentives, and he's got sort of 3 or 4 companies working on the problem, and that'll be enough, unless the electorate are fool enough to elect a left-wing Democrat in 28, or even, I suppose, 26, but that probably won't make a difference. They'll have got the problem solved.
Wow. And Europe, just, I mean, we saw that Anthropic banned their latest model of AI, their Claude, I can't remember what it's called now, called Mythos or
well, it's
something.
Claude, but I can't
Claude
remember.
5.
It's Claude with a number on the end. Yes.
Claude 5, Model 5, and they was out for 3 days. And for those 3 days, various users were saying, my God, I've simulated these most incredible things. I've created this and this. And everyone thought, this is great. And then they banned it a few days later. So if you're in Europe, you can't access the latest model. It says there's a big sign saying, I'm afraid the model is unavailable. So I'm wondering, there's going to be, because at the moment we're all using American models except DeepSeek, which is Chinese. The Americans could cut us off in Europe completely. And we're left.
America could cut Europe off. It would obviously be foolish to do so. But I think the Pentagon in particular is worried about AI's capabilities falling into less than friendly hands. Personally, I don't think Europe's a problem, because I don't think Europe's less than friendly by and large. And secondly, because I don't think the European defense agencies, with the possible exception of Britain's GCHQ, are capable of doing much with it if they had access to it. So I don't think it's a problem.
Oh dear.
I mean, there's a reason GCHQ doesn't share secrets with the French, and they were in the EU for donkey's years. So everybody's always had a problem with Europe.
Yeah. So because there's a paradox. We're talking about America being an innovator and leading the way, because this is culture of openness and seed money and all the rest of it. But at the same time, America, as we've established, prospered precisely because it had a closed market, and that the American model was exported to Bismarckian Germany and Russia in the early 1900s, and those countries grew very fast. And the only country that didn't had free trade was really Britain, and the British were really upset. So try and help me work out that paradox.
Well, the world went protectionist after 1862. The British free trade, they had the Cobden-Chevalier Treaty of 1860, and that was really the last advance in that direction. And then Lincoln came in America and brought in really excessive protectionism with the Mole tariff, and then McKinley tariff in 1890 and the Dingley tariff in 1897, each higher than the last. And that made the American market sort of completely protected against competition. And what it did do was produce giganticism in the US. That's why you got the robber barons and their robber baron fortunes. They were able to prosper artificially behind a tariff barrier. Someone like Carnegie would have been rich in any country, but he was a hell of a lot richer being able to create US steel, as he essentially did, within the US behind a huge tariff barrier. Whereas the British, who actually invented the Bessemer process, or the French, who invented the Siemens-Martin process, didn't have such high tariffs and weren't able to benefit so much. The protectionist countries, built up huge companies behind the protectionist walls, and that's the problem with protectionism, is it tends to lead to giganticism in the companies, which in the long run is very inefficient, as we've seen all over the world. I mean, companies of 100,000 employees are just not effective.
Right. But I mean, it allowed them to grow behind. I mean, they would have been outcompeted. Isn't it that free trade always benefits the hegemon, And so if you're trying to grow and displace the hegemon, then you better have a tariff.
Free trade benefited Britain till about 1870. Or, 1862, 1870, something like that, because Britain always had lower tariffs than anywhere else in those years, but Britain was still the industrial hegemon. But then after 1870, other places started having much higher tariffs. Germany, 1879, France, 1892, and the US over time. And so Britain gradually fell behind. And it also wasn't as innovative, and its government was meddling. I mean, the British nationalized the tech sector in 1868. The Electric and International Telegraph Company, which was the leader in what, of course, would become the electrical industry about 10 years later. All the electrical innovators, Siemens and Edison, came from the telegraph business. But the British had nationalized it and stuffed it in the post office. And so the Honourable Ronald Grimston, who was head of the Electric and International Telegraph Company and was also president of the Marylebone Cricket Club, was unable to innovate and create the British electrical industry. I mean, he obviously wouldn't have done it himself, but he'd have had people who did. You say you're Corelli Barnett.
Well, the thing is, Corelli Barnett, I was a great fan of his. I was reading his books.
Same here.
The 70s and 80s. And I think he was Margaret Thatcher's favorite historian, and he was still alive
then.
And he wrote,
I can confirm that.
So, and she enormously admired Germany. People forget that because they think she was anti-German. Maybe she was, but she also admired Germany. And she basically saw Britain's progress since 1880 or something as being very uneven and she came from a science background, as do I. And I was struck when I then went into journalism, because I did science A-levels and university, maths at university. I was struck how arrogant people who'd studied, history and English were about how the world functioned. They didn't actually know how the world functions, but they could express their ignorance in a beautiful way, which meant that they were great bullshitters, basically. So when she, with her science chemistry background, criticized the British establishment, I really agree with her. I really felt for her, because she came from a science background and brass tacks sort of thing. And I felt that very strongly. And then I worked for engineering journalism. I worked for medical journalism and then engineering journalism. And it was striking how much more articulate the medical lobby was than the engineering lobby. I thought the British engineers were doing great jobs, but they were not very good at selling themselves. And I thought it goes into the class system. This was in the 2010s. The British engineers seem to shrivel when they talk to British, because they, and then at university also, I knew a lot of engineers, and they were doing really difficult. The highest IQ apparently is, they've done a measurements of the people with the highest IQ. It's people studying mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. But they're also regarded as sort of almost subhuman. I mean, I remember all these history undergraduates, they were getting all the girls, and the mechanical engineers with their IQs of 160, they couldn't get any girls, and they were just playing flipper games. They were playing pinball games in the students' union, and they didn't have a social life. So that's the thing. And I guess British engineers, they might have been among the best in the world, but they didn't have the kind of respect that engineers have in Germany and France. And I said this goes back to the 18th century. Industrialization started early in Britain, so it always had an artisanal quality. British engineering. It was the Germans in the 1870s. They had engineering schools and they treated it as a serious profession, and that's why the Germans leapt ahead of the British in the 1880s, and that's what led to World War One, because the British establishment were really jealous because I mean, as I said, they sort of looked down on their own engineers and science people, and then the Germans were a nation of science people. It was almost like their resentments from university playing out against the Germans and the Jews, because the Jews were also very good at science and so on. And all these sort of fox hunting aristocrat toffs, English history greats, classicists and so on. They hated the Germans and they hated their own science people. Does that feed into your understanding of history? Or do you think it's exaggerated?
Not quite the same extent. I'm slightly Corelli Barnett skeptic. I think in particular that British industry in the 1930s was really pretty good. It had something of a renaissance once they got imperial preference.
Exactly.
Neville Chamberlain was a very good chancellor, and British industry in the late 1930s was inventing everything. I mean, radar, the Lagonda V12, you name it. But my quote for you is going back earlier than even your example of the 1880s. Justus von Liebig, who was the inventor of organic chemistry, the German professor, 1853 writes on this subject. And he said, I had a lengthy conversation with the late Sir Robert Peel about this subject. And he said that British manufacturers were all wonderful because they made advances. And I said that they weren't going to be able to go on doing that because manufacturing advances are like gold mining. Any fool can pick up lumps of gold on the ground, but if you actually have to mine it, then you need deep expertise and a lot of very hard work, and the British won't put that in. And that's 1853, and from somebody who really did understand scientific advance. So, it validates your point, if you like.
The British
but it also blames Peel, which I always like to do.
Happy amateurs. So just to wind up, I mean, we could talk about endlessly. We can maybe talk about it next time. But so, I mean, of course, the British invented the computer, the first the jet plane, and because I was writing gloomy articles for this engineering magazine saying why the British are not re-innovating. But partly the Americans outcompeted them and blocked their innovations. I mean, the Concorde famously couldn't land in America for a while because they thought it was too noisy. But I mean, the British innovated the computer, the jet, and the first reactor, but they were never able to monetize that, or they never able to turn that into economic success.
But the blocking the computer was Disraeli's fault for nationalizing the telegraph industry in 1868. Right. Because the post office was responsible for computer innovation. And when Bletchley Park had done its thing, the post office shut it down.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, I mean, and basically they had to go and reinvent it, which Turing eventually did at Manchester University. But by that stage, 3 years had passed and the Americans were ahead of us. But no, it was Disraeli's fault, was losing the computer. But no, I think that Britain still has the ability, particularly in things like AI, because it's software, that kind of thing, doesn't require getting your hands dirty. And the British are therefore very good at all that intellectual advances. And of course, my old College of Trinity owns the Cambridge Science Park, which indeed has produced innovations in those areas. I think the problem in Britain is simply going to be there's not enough power.
Right.
And my advice to Andy Burnham would be immediately resign and give us a Tory government which will free up the power industry and the North Sea drilling so that Britain is properly self-sufficient in power again, even when you add the requirements of AI. Because with the requirements of AI are going to add themselves to a very overstretched British grid. and they can't buy all that electricity from Norway, and they have the most expensive electricity in Europe. So AI will be prevented by idiot electricity costs, which is utterly unforgivable.
All right, I think we'd better end there, actually. But thank you so much, and love to have on. Must come on again shortly. Highly enjoyed.
Will do, absolutely. It's
All
great
right,
fun.
thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you,
Both of
Martin.
you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, cheers.